Good morning. Thank you for joining us today. If you would take out your Old Testament, please, and join me in Psalm 55. Turn over to Psalm 55. We'll discuss this psalm this morning in our devotional session. The devotional time is one that's set aside to encourage us, to kind of help us along and motivate us and even get us ready for observing the Lord's Supper and worshiping God. And so during this time, we're going to look at Psalm 55, if you'll turn over there with me. As you're turning over there, a couple of questions. Have you ever felt like life is just kind of out of control? Or maybe even that people or events and circumstances have conspired against you? Have you ever looked at life and said, this is not what I thought it would be, and this is not what I want it to be? Sometimes we consider our circumstance and we come to a realization that this is not the way we thought it was going to go. And this is certainly not what we want. A lot of folks are experiencing that right now. And lots of folks experience that generally in life because of either sickness or work problems or maybe the loss of someone you love. Sometimes we look at our lives and they're just not what we want them to be, and we see people and events conspiring against us to make it even worse. David knew about that. There is a psalm, Psalm 55, where David talks about that. What we want to do is read this and just learn a few lessons from it. So read with me, please, beginning in verse 1 of Psalm 55. We'll read verses 1 through 11. Psalm 55, verses 1 through 11. David says, "Give ear to my prayer, O God, and do not hide yourself from my supplication. Give heed to me and answer me. I am restless in my complaint, and I am surely distracted because of the voice of the enemy, because of the pressure of the wicked. For they bring down trouble upon me, and in anger they bear a grudge against me." He says, "My heart," verse 4, "is in anguish within me, and the terrors of death have fallen upon me. Fear and trembling have come upon me, and horror has overwhelmed me. I said, oh, that I had wings like a dove. I would fly away and be at rest. Behold, I would wander far away. I would lodge in the wilderness. I would hasten to my place of refuge from the stormy wind and tempest." In verse 9, he says, "Confuse, O Lord, divide their tongues. For I have seen violence and strife in the city. Day and night they go around upon her walls, and iniquity and mischief are in her midst. Destruction is in her midst. Oppression and deceit do not depart from her streets." The psalmist looks around and he says, things are just terrible. And he's applying that to himself personally. It's not that things are terrible somewhere else. It's that things are terrible with him, right where he is. And look at what he's saying there. If you go back up a little bit, first of all, he says, "Lord, please hear me and please answer me." And then he says, "I am restless and I am distracted because of the enemy." Verse 4, "My heart is in anguish within me, and the terrors of death have fallen upon me." The psalmist is afraid. The psalmist is exhausted from being afraid. You ever been there? Have you ever been in a situation where you look around and you don't see a lot of positive? You don't even see a lot of hope. Sometimes life is like that. I know there are the fortunate few who never seem to struggle with anything like that, and life just seems to be easy for them. I'm convinced it's not, but it appears that way from the outside. But for many of us, life is hard sometimes. And every now and then, due to some sort of confluence of various things taking place, life is hard ongoingly. And we just don't see a lot of opportunity for things to get better. David was in that situation. But he gives us a little more clarity beginning in verse 12 about how he got there. Beginning in verse 12, he says, "For it is not an enemy who reproaches me, then I could bear it. Nor is it one who hates me, who has exalted himself against me. Then I could hide from him." He says, look, my troubles, the problems that I'm having, they're not due to my enemy. If they were due to my enemy, I would be able to handle it a whole lot better. If it was from someone who hates me that was causing me all this trouble, I could handle that. I could understand that. Look at what he says in verse 13. But it is you, a man my equal, my companion, and my familiar friend. We who had sweet fellowship together, walked in the house of God in the throng, let death come deceitfully upon them. Let them go down alive to Sheol, for evil is in their dwelling, in their midst. David says, it's not the outsider, it's not the enemy who's caused me problems. It's my friend. It's the one I trusted. It's the one who should have helped me. Isn't that an interesting thing for David to say? Again, from time to time, we kind of feel like that. Have you ever been maligned by someone you really didn't think would do that to you? You ever been put in a bad spot because of something a friend did? Something maybe even a brother and sister in Christ did. And now things are harder for you, maybe even unbearable it seems, because of what someone you trusted did. You ever been there? David understands that. But as you probably know, this psalm, at least in this section specifically, has a bit of messianic application as well. And it is David saying it. It is Jesus who lived it. He is the one whose body and whose existence on earth was in anguish. And he is the one who said, it was from my friend. He was betrayed. Now, if we have been betrayed by someone or even by circumstances, we can relate to it. But none of us have had to deal with what the Lord went through. And we know that. And so understanding that, at once we find ourselves backing up a little bit and saying, okay, I can handle it. I haven't had to endure what Jesus had to endure. I haven't been betrayed by one so close to me as he was, and he all along had done no wrong. So I can understand that, and I can back up a little bit, and I can say, okay, I'll be all right. But what the psalmist does from this point forward, beginning in verse 16, is he gives us the solution to the problem. Now, the solution to the problem doesn't make the problem go away. It doesn't make life all of the sudden fine. It doesn't make the anguish and the hurt and the pain go away. It's not what it does. The solution, though, allows us to deal with it, and deal with it in a way where eternally it's going to be all right. And so he says in verse 16, after having said, it was my friend, my close friend, the one with whom I had sweet fellowship, it was that person who betrayed me, then he says, verse 16, as for me, I shall call upon God, and the Lord will save me. That kind of has a little bit of Romans 13 to it. Now, Romans 10:13, doesn't it? Whosoever shall call upon the name of the Lord shall be saved. Kind of has a little bit of that. That's a quotation from Joel, which Peter used in Acts 2. Kind of sounds like that. Look ahead a little bit into verse 2 of Psalm 57. Verse 2 of Psalm 57. He says, I will cry to God Most High, to God who accomplishes all things for me. He will send from heaven and save me. That's what God does. And so back over in Psalm 55 and verse 16, as for me, I shall call upon God, and the Lord will save me. That's how he operates. He says, evening and morning, and at noon I will complain and murmur, and he will hear my voice. He will redeem my soul in peace from the battle which is against me. For there are many who strive with me. God will hear and answer them. Even the one who sits enthroned from of old, with whom there is no change, and do not fear God. He has put forth his hands against those who were at peace with him. He has violated his covenant. His speech was smoother than butter, but his heart was at war. His words were softer than oil, yet they were drawn swords. He says, okay, God is going to answer me, and God knows about the treachery. God knows about the bad circumstances. God knows about the events that have conspired against me. He understands all of that. What a comfort that is to God's people today, to know God knows. Whatever it is that has troubled you. And maybe it's not one thing. Again, maybe it's a series of events that have put you in a place where you just don't see a lot of hope by yourself. The psalmist is saying, I understand that. But God is always there. He always sees everything. He knows what has happened. And He knows where you are. And so the only answer is to turn to Him. Verse 16, to call upon Him. That's all there is. There is no one else to turn to. No one else can fix the problem. And so, verse 22, cast your burden upon the Lord, and He will sustain you. He will never allow the righteous to be shaken. I love that verse. Cast your burden upon the Lord, and He will sustain. No one else will sustain you. No other circumstance will sustain you. Even the one who is so close to you cannot sustain you like God can. Isn't that an interesting thing? You know, those of us who are involved in families where there is love and concern, whether it be husband and wife, parent and child, or any other familial relationship where there is true love and concern, we count on those people, don't we? We trust in those people. But not like we count on God. Not like we trust in God. There are some burdens that my loved ones cannot bear for me. There are some burdens that they cannot sustain me with. And so, cast your burden upon the Lord, and He will sustain you. Then that statement, He will never allow you to be shaken. He will never allow the righteous to be shaken. That shaken so as to fall is what it gets to. It reminds me, every time I read it, reminds me of the Humpty Dumpty thing. Sat on the wall, fell off. Well, what the psalmist is saying is you may teeter a little bit. You may wobble around a little bit. It might look really bad for a while, but you will not fall, is what he's after. Reminds me of Paul's statement in 1 Corinthians 10:13. We'll have to deal with some things that are unbearable without God. But with God, we're okay. We may not like it. It may be hard. It may be in anguish, but we will be okay. And then he says, verse 23, but you, O God, will bring them down to the pit of destruction. Men of bloodshed and deceit will not live out half their days. That's an interesting thing. It has a little bit of that psalm of vengeance idea into it, the imprecatory kind of thing, where he says you're going to make things right. And you can count on that now. If God is the one to whom we can turn, if He is the one to whom we should call, if He is that, then we have to trust that He will make things right. And the things you have to endure, He knows about. And those maybe who caused it, those who have been your enemy, those who have done things wrong to the righteous, God will settle that up. When He says there in verse 23, they won't live out half their days, He doesn't literally mean that every single person who does evil is only going to live half a life. What He's saying is, He'll take care of that. He'll take care of it. You don't have to worry about that. The person who did you wrong, don't worry about that. Move on from that. Call out to God, trust in God, and let that go. And then the last statement of verse 23. He simply says, but I will trust in you. If we were all together in the building, that's one of those phrases I might ask us all to say together. But I will trust in you. Yeah, but what's going on in my life is so, but I will trust in you. But I didn't think it was going to be like this. But I will trust in you. I am sick. And the doctors say there's no solution for it. But I will trust in you. Someone I loved with all my heart has died, but I will trust in you. The thing I want us to get out of this devotional session is there is no other answer than that. The difficulties of life will come. They will not come in a fair way. They will come sometimes to us in different proportions. Some will struggle more than others. Some will have many more difficulties than others. It's not going to be fair. It never has been fair. But we will trust in God. That's what we'll do. And we may call on him out of a heart full of anguish, out of a heart full of pain and sadness. We may call on him not understanding what's going on in our lives or what has been happening for years in our lives. We may call on him and just not know. But we will trust in him. There's a section of Hebrews 11 that might be helpful to us at this moment. Turn over there with me in your New Testament to Hebrews 11. You know, Hebrews 11 has the by faith discussions. And so many people are named. Here's what they did by faith. And it is such an uplifting passage because there has been so much done by faith, by trusting in God. But the section beginning in verse 32 really means a lot to me. He mentions a few folks by name, and then he launches into a no-name section. He says in verse 32, "And what more shall I say, for time will fail me, if I tell of Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, and David, and Samuel, and the prophets, who by faith conquered kingdoms, performed acts of righteousness, obtained promises, shut the mouths of lions, quenched the power of fire, escaped the edge of the sword, from weakness were made strong, became mighty in war, put foreign enemies to flight, women who received back their dead by resurrection, and others were tormented and tortured, not accepting their release so that they might obtain a better resurrection, and others experienced mockings and scourgings, and yes, also chains and imprisonments. They were stoned, they were sawn in two, they were tempted, they were put to death with the sword, they went about in sheepskins and goatskins, being destitute, afflicted, ill-treated." Do you see what he's saying? But they trusted in God. If you're looking at your life right now and saying, this is just the worst and no one has ever had to deal with anything this bad, I don't want to be insensitive about it, but you're probably wrong. Others have had to deal with things like you are having to deal with, and others have chosen to trust in God. He is the only solution. That is the only way to really get through this life successfully. And so he says in verse 29 of that chapter, 39, excuse me, "All these, having gained approval through their faith, did not receive what was promised, because God had provided something better for us, so that apart from us they would not be made perfect." What is that about? Well, here's what he says. All these people who trusted in God in circumstances well beyond what most of us will ever experience, all those people, they didn't live to see Jesus. They didn't live to see the completed promise. They didn't live to see that which is perfect come into the world and establish his kingdom that will endure forever. You see that. Trust in God. There is a song we used to sing at Northside quite a bit. Brother Spencer Card used to lead the song often. It is, the first 2 or 3 times he led it, I wasn't crazy about it. And that's because it is very repetitious. It's song 603 in the songbook we normally sing. Over a period of time, I have become one who loves the song. I suspect Brother Card saw in that song, because of his wisdom and maturity, things I didn't see when I was younger. I'm going to read you some of the song. It's entitled, "Burdens Are Lifted at Calvary." Listen to this. "Days are filled with sorrow and care. Hearts are lonely and drear. Burdens are lifted at Calvary. Jesus is very near. Cast your care on Jesus today. Leave your worry and fear. Burdens are lifted at Calvary. Jesus is very near. Troubled soul, the Savior can see every heartache and tear. Burdens are lifted at Calvary. Jesus is very near." Then the chorus. Here's what it says. Burdens are lifted at Calvary. Calvary, Calvary. Burdens are lifted at Calvary. Jesus is very near. It is repetitious, and rightly so, because the only solution to the problems of this life, the burdens of this life, the anguish of this life, the disappointments of this life, the only solution to that is what happened at Calvary. And so the psalmist says, but I will trust in the Lord. And you and I say, I will trust in the Lord. Thank you so much for participating with us this morning. If after having read through this psalm, you look at your life and you see that some changes need to be made, let's get that handled. Let's trust in God, the one who made us, the one who wants to spend eternity with us. Let's trust in him and his Son who died for us at Calvary to solve the problems of this life so we can spend eternity with him. You let us know if we can help you. Thanks so much for watching.